Greetings, Wilkinson here. Today my guest is Dr. Robert Philipson. He is a professor, author, filmmaker, and he is currently the founder, president, and artistic director of Shoga Film. Say hi to my people.
Hello, your people.
Glad you were here. Robert is in town. He's an Airbnb guest, and as usually happens once a year, we have the Cinema Diverse Film Festival, which is the LGBTQ plus film festival in Palm Springs, and he has a film here, which is a lovely film. I saw it the other day as his guest. I appreciate that. But anyway, first of all, your Shoga Films. What does Shoga mean? Tell me.
Shoga is Swahili for faggot.
Really?
Yes.
Why would you pick Swahili? I already know, but I want you to share the info.
When I graduated from college, I hope none of your listeners are any good at math because then they'll figure out my age.
Uh-oh.
But when I graduated from college in 1974, I joined the Peace Corps.
Okay.
And I was sent to the Central African Republic as a Peace Corps volunteer. And I stayed there for 3 years. And it blew me away on, not the gay one, but in terms of...
Oh, wait, you're gay? I thought, just kidding.
Oh, shucks. You'll edit that part out, right?
Yes.
In terms of cultural relativism, living in what we call back then third world countries, now I guess they're called countries, developing countries, and living as a minority white person in a majority black society, it was extremely eye-opening. It was also the beginning of my teaching career. I was teaching English as a foreign language in upcountry high schools. In any event, I did go through a period of culture shock about 6 months in, which is pretty much the normal timeline for people who are living in foreign cultures. Once I worked my way through that, I really appreciated African culture, came to love it, and made African studies and African literature a specialty of mine. And when I went back to graduate school, I determined that I would learn an African language in order to get a better understanding of African literature. A lot of African literature, certainly novels and poems, plays that are internationally known are written in French or English, languages of the former colonial powers, which have been adopted by most countries as their official language. But what's actually spoken on the ground are the various indigenous languages. And the largest one of those, and the ones with the longest written literary tradition, is Swahili on the East African coast. And so Swahili is what I learned.
Wow.
And I spent a year in Tanzania, Dar es Salaam, working on my doctoral dissertation, which was the plays of an untranslated Swahili playwright. And it was there that I it was through my contacts with this East African culture that I became familiar with a style of same-sex being in the world.
Okay.
These are men who identify as women, who dress as women, who are they're not regarded as women, but they're called shoga. And shoga is a term of endearment between women. It's like sister.
Okay.
So when they're called shoga, it's a kind of a snarky acknowledgement that these guys aren't really men, but they're not categorically rejected. There's a place for them in Swahili society. So I was fascinated by this style of same-sex, as I say, being in the world, and acceptance that was non-Western. It was definitely not gay as we think of it in the West. So that's where shoga comes from.
Wow. Very interesting. I can't imagine trying to learn that language. I read somewhere that you camp out at the intersection of race, music, and sexuality. That's a kind of an interesting combo there. Talk a little about that.
When I was a university professor,
okay,
and my specialty was Black and African literature. Black also encompassed African American literature, and there was much more call for that in the United States than there was for African literature. I grew up in Pasadena, California. pretty segregated society at the time. 8% blacks in my high school, Pasadena High School. And in fact, Pasadena Unified School District was the second school district outside of the South to have court-ordered busing imposed on the school district. So, as I say, I didn't really grow up with much knowledge or firsthand experience with blacks, but going to graduate school, living in large urban sectors, teaching African-American students and having African-American boyfriends and friends, I became familiar with the culture academically and in terms of personal experience as well. The last course I taught was on the Harlem Renaissance. And I was somewhat familiar with the literature and the period, but the more I delved into it, the more fascinated I became with it. And the more I kept running into these tidbits about how this person was gay or this person was bisexual or this person was rumored to have had an affair with a person of the same sex. Now, this was in the early aughts, and historical reclamation of gay history has made leaps and bounds since then. But at the time, nobody had brought it together under one umbrella. Documentaries. So that's what I started with documentary filmmaking. That was my subject matter. And so Black queer subject matter. I myself am Jewish. So I was also interested in the intersection, they call it intersectionality, between of Jewish and queer and the interrelations of Blacks and Jews that sort of became the three areas of interest to me where I was making my movies and doing a lot of my research. Music is an essential aspect of any cultural questioning or delving into the ways that cultures relate to or influence one another. And so I love music, have some musical background myself. So I threw that in the mix.
When was Shoga Films created? Like how long ago?
I describe Shoga Films or my career as a filmmaker as a hobby that grew out of control. And that's pretty much what happened. I took my first filmmaking course at Berkeley City College in 2000, at the age of 50. And then I went back into the Peace Corps and did another year in Namibia. We don't need to go down that rabbit hole, but when I came back, I continued my multimedia courses and made my first film that I put on a film festival in 2005, I believe. No, excuse me, 2006. It was a music video called Ma Rainey's Lesbian Licks. And it was a cover of a song that the famous blues singer Ma Rainey had recorded in 1928 called Prove It On Me Blues. It was quite obscure at the time, but it has since been rediscovered by researchers of queer history and lesbians because it's a very interesting affirmation of lesbian love. One of the lyrics is, went out last night with a bunch of my friends. They must have been women because I don't like no men. But the recordings that Ma Rainey had done in the 20s, she did 100 of them in a 4-year period.
Well,
yeah. Was with Paramount, and Paramount was probably the worst in terms of technical support of the studios that were recording blues at the time and marketing them as race records. So even though Ma Rainey is a very foundational and important voice in African-American music blues history, and her recordings are difficult to listen to because they're just really so awful quality. You cannot make out the lyrics if you're coming to them for the first time. Yeah.
Wow.
So I had a band come in and do a modern cover of it and called it Ma Rainey's Lesbian Licks. Went out on the film festival circuit, got accepted into 20 different film festivals. It was quite successful. Then I did another one after that, which was also accepted in a lot of film festivals. And for a newbie filmmaker, this was a remarkable success rate.
Right.
It wasn't so much that I was a genius. It was I had found a subject matter that was niche.
Yeah, you tapped into some.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That people were really hungry for in that particular niche. Every film got a little longer and more ambitious, and finally I realized that I would need to incorporate. I incorporated it as a nonprofit in 2015. So,
Okay.
Long answer to a short question.
No, that's good. Like to hear that background. I have a question though. When you went to the Peace Corps for the first time, now you mentioned that you were attracted to Black men as a gay man. So did you request to go to Africa, or did that just happen?
You can't request.
You can't.
In the Peace Corps, you join to serve. You can't say, I want to go to Nigeria.
Yeah.
They send you where your skills are needed.
So you just lucked out where you went.
It was, I did luck out.
Yeah.
But
or the universe arranged it for you, whatever.
Yes. I knew French. I had lived in Paris as a child for a few years and had been sent to French elementary school. So I knew French. And French-speaking volunteers were in high demand in Francophone countries, in the countries that had been formerly part of the French colonial empire. So that was a foregone conclusion that was where I would be sent.
That's good. So the film that I saw that you brought to this festival, it's called The Knowing. Talk a little about that.
The Knowing is a 25-minute short. It's a narrative short about an interracial couple that it's an AIDS story, among other things. And the part of the history of this particular couple that is in the film is in the year 1992. This is before the appearance of retroviral drugs on the scene. And so AIDS had been coming into the gay community for almost a decade, claiming greater and greater number of lives. And it was, in most cases, a death sentence. And this was still the case in 1992. The couple that is at the center of the story is no longer a couple. They were a couple in the early 80s living in D.C. One, Peter is Black, Adam is white. The relationship broke up, and Adam moved back to San Francisco and had been living there for 5 years when he learned that, and Peter told him that he had AIDS. So Adam resumed a close communication, even though he was across the country, with Peter, organized a support system for him, came out to visit him while he was sick, and once more was a final visit when Peter was in the hospital on his last legs. While he's in the hospital, he meets one of Peter's running buddies, a Black lesbian naval officer who had become friends with Peter when they were in an affirming church. At the time it was and some revelations come out that really shock Adam and puts a whole different spin on the kind of person that he thought his ex-lover was and the kind of relationship he'd had with him. And that's what the story's about.
And it made me cry. It's a very moving story. Something else that I was looking through some of your stuff online. And by the way, we'll put some notes in our the episode notes where people can contact you. And by the way, on the film itself, The Knowing, is that out there yet, or is it going to come out at a future date where people can look it up and watch it? How does that work?
The Knowing will get distribution some way, shape, or form, but I don't know what it is yet. It's on the film festival circuit.
Okay. I just thought of something else I was going to ask you. So on The Knowing, we had, of course, chatted because you've been here for 4 days, but you had mentioned at one point that you were having trouble getting this film in festivals, and that kind of shocked me, just because of the topic.
I think it was because of the topic that I was having trouble getting into film festivals.
That's weird to me, because we're always talking about, as gay men, discrimination and stuff, but yet they're discriminating against you for covering this topic? It seems strange to me.
There are a couple of things to keep in mind when, first of all, what are the needs of the programmers? These mid-length films are difficult for programmers because they're looking for ways to fill up. If it's a shorts program, they're looking for ways to fill up 60 to 90 minutes. If you have a film that's 25 minutes, then that's the 500-pound gorilla of that particular set. And what do you put with that? You need to either balance it out with films of equal length or films that have a subject matter that are somehow thematically related. Otherwise, it's difficult for programmers to deal with that. So length was part of the problem. In fact, we started out with 25 minutes and then cut it down to 20 minutes because we figured that length was one of the disincentives. And once we started out sending the 20-minute version, we started getting acceptances. So we were right about that. Secondly...
But you have the 25-minute version in this...
I did.
This one.
Yeah. I did, okay. Yes. And of course, being the writer, cutting out 5 minutes was stabbing me in the heart.
You're cutting my baby's arm off.
But we did what we needed to do in order to get it out into the world. So it's finally getting some traction. And in fact, the month of October, it will be shown in 3 of the film festivals above and beyond the one that we just showed here in Palm Springs School. So yeah, we're happy about that. But the 20-minute version, not the 25-minute version. Okay. In any event, the subject matter is AIDS, and in large part, the white gay community is over it. Doesn't really want to be taken back to that period because for a lot of them, it's history. It's a manageable disease. You take a pill or a shot. You don't have to think about it anymore. And who wants to go back to the bad old days? So there's that disincentive. For the Black queer community, it's one of the statistics that I still find shocking is that 50% of Black men who have sex with other men, whether it be on the down low or not, contract HIV right here in 2024.
Wow. Half. That's crazy.
Yeah. 50%. Yeah. This is a shocking statistic. It isn't widely known. It isn't widely discussed, even in the Black community. There's stigma is a huge reason for this. Not only stigma of contracting the disease itself, but stigmas as admitting to be queer in the Black community. It's still
if you're on the down low, that would be hard. Yeah.
The other thing is that as a white producer of these films, especially since the Black Lives Matter so-called racial reckoning of 2020, there's been a lot of questioning and suspicion of Black stories being told by non-Blacks, which I understand, and a lot of it is certainly justifiable. But obviously, I consider myself to be an exception. In terms of the subject matter or the perspective, it's an uphill battle.
But you're an ally, but they don't recognize that.
There's no form that I can fill out, and I get a sticker or certificate that says I'm an ally. I have to convince people of that on a case-by-case basis.
But I think if they see your work, wouldn't they see that?
Yes. Yes.
So the trick is getting them to see your work.
It's not just that. How many film festivals have to walk a fine line between opening their screens, if you will, to new and non-commercial works? Any short is not going to be commercially viable, generally. The only thing that has a snowball's chance in hell of making any money or getting a decent distribution deal is going to be a feature-length film, which is a major proposition and not one that I'm interested in pursuing.
That was the question I was going to ask. So you don't want to turn this into a feature?
I don't want to turn anything into a feature. A feature takes 5 years and $2 million at a minimum.
Yeah. Wow.
And I don't have the time or the willingness to go that route.
So distribution is just letting people see this and sticking to what you're doing.
There are distribution channels, not going to be Netflix or Amazon Prime, but there are channels, there are distribution platforms that specialize in shorts or Black distribution channels. There's one called Quelly TV that I have my stuff on, which is a Black channel.
How about Here TV?
I haven't really tried them yet.
Okay. Because I think that would work. They've got a lot of...
There's a lot of... Yeah. There's definitely a hunger for content out there.
Right. And they need some good content. I looked over all the new offerings and said, oh boy.
That's the other thing. That's the other strike against me, is that I don't have enough naked shirtless hunks. Although my last narrative before this one was called Smoke Lilies and Jade, and I do have some really pretty men at the center of that. So we have high hopes. And it was narrated by Billy Porter.
All right, I'll have to put that on my list. So as I was looking through your material, something really popped out at me. You were and the reason I want you to talk about this is, and we talked about this earlier, is my audience. I do this podcast to reach guys in small towns that don't have real gay experience or friends or whatever. So you talk about the 3 stages of gay acceptance. Can you talk a little about that? I think it might be helpful for some of my listeners.
Yeah. When I was, how'd you run across that article? Did I show it?
I snoop around.
Okay.
No.
When I came out in 1977, when I was 27, late in the game.
Oh, you don't know. I can beat you, but go ahead.
And even though it was several years after the Stonewall riots, gay liberation was an unevenly diffused throughout the population, and even among people who eventually recognized and accepted themselves as queers, because the stigma of being perceived as queer was still pretty strong.
Right.
So I was living and working in D.C. I had moved to D.C. to be with my first lover. I'd fallen in love. He was living in D.C. I had a job in the federal administration, but we had just transitioned from Carter administration to the Reagan administration. So this was the beginning of the Reagan Revolution and the political ascent of conservative ideology, which in retrospect seems almost benign, but at the time it seemed pretty awful. But there was a young man in the office that I was working in who was out there. He seemed to be pretty unbothered. It was easy to peg him as gay, and he seemed to be pretty unbothered by it. And all the gays who worked in this office, we knew one another. We didn't necessarily hang out together, but we knew who we were. And during the course of the conversation, I asked him how he could be so at ease in an environment which was officially still homophobic. It was the Reagan administration. And he said, he went through 3 stages of gay acceptance. And the first stage was, oh God, is it me? And the second stage was, oh God, it is me. And the third stage was, thank God it's me. Now, I'd already been through, oh God, is it me? And oh God, it is me, But I was not yet and could not understand how you get to the third stage. Thank God it's me. Took me a couple of years, but I got there. And the reason that I finally got there was because I came to realize as I got more comfortable with my gay identity and the gay community or the queer community, because I always had a lot of contact with lesbians, is we have a great time. We have a lot of fun. The humor is great.
And our places are fabulous.
Our parties can be fabulous. There's a lot of fabulosity connected with gay culture. Right. And we aren't scripted into this very narrow heterosexual playbook, which is completely unrealistic for 95% of the population, of no sex until marriage, sex only with your married partner until death do you part. Who lives that kind of life? But that was what was officially promoted and considered to be acceptable within mainstream culture. Well, we were exempt from that. We were completely bounced out of that. So every gay relationship had to find its own footing, make its own rules. And monogamy, maybe okay. Polyamory, maybe okay. Interesting. Foot fetish, sure, why not? Whips and chains might be interesting to try. And we could be open about all of this. We didn't have to be ashamed or clandestine. We could talk about this openly. Our sex lives are just generally way more long-lasting and interesting than our counterparts in the straight community. I'm in my 70s, and I'm still having wonderful sex with people that I don't necessarily know. I describe myself as promiscuous, and at my age, that's actually a badge of honor.
Yeah. So if somebody was stuck in one of the first two stages, what's your recommendation for them? How do they get out of it? How do they move on?
Well, of course, if you're in stage one, oh God, is it me? You're actually already in stage two because it is you.
Right.
So how do you get from, oh God, it's me to thank God it's me? You have to find things within queer culture that are liberating for you. And that might be difficult if you're in a small town where there's not much queer culture that is visible, or there's a lot of stigma that still surrounds being queer culture, in which case you have to get it where you can. And that doesn't mean porn that you hide under the bed. There's so many outlets now, especially with the internet. And I'm not talking about porn. There are podcasts, there are movies, there's so many outlets for queer content. And it doesn't really matter what flavor of queer you're interested in or find yourself moving towards. You will find something out there on the internet that reflects that and will teach you how to maneuver in that world socially and technically, if you will. Find the aspect of queer culture that you relate to and explore it.
And try to explore it off of Grindr and Scruff. Because
Exactly.
you're not going to find it.
Exactly. If you confine queer to getting your rocks off one way or another, you're never going to get to stage 3.
Okay. So as we wind down, because I know you want to go on a little road trip around the mountain here, and I got to let you go. What have you learned in your life? What guides you?
Oh, Lord.
And 3 words or less. No, I'm just kidding. What do you live by? What have you learned?
The cliche is, to quote Shakespeare, to thine own self be true. Mm-hmm. But what people don't realize, that because I was a professor of comparative literature, I know this, most people don't, is that those words they're from Hamlet. And the man who proffers them is a blowhard. So even though it's hard to argue with the sentiment, I think what has guided me and kept me on the rails has been the quality of human relationships that I've been able to establish and maintain. Some have been provided me from my family. I've been fortunate with that. Some have come from the friendships that I've made, the communities that I've been able to be part of. I would say that what has been most important for me, and it's been a hard lesson for me because when I was younger, I was full of myself, is community, friendship, love, family, relations with other people.
Thank you for coming in. It's been great having you in my home.
It's been wonderful. You've been so hospitable.
Thank you. I enjoy it. I consider you a new friend.
Thank you.
And I hope we stay in touch.
I expect we shall.